meal planning, and we also have discussed in the previous weeks a little bit about some of our theories on that, how we break that up. But we're going to really get into some detail and then talk about how to modulate that, our calorie intake. When do you need to maybe do some calorie cycling, some carb cycling? How do you handle those higher calorie days? Some interesting new research out there now, so we're going to break that down. But first of all, in meal planning. Paul and I have a little bit of a disagreement, but I'm going to see if I can convince him here in the next 30 minutes.
Here's how I'm going to disagree.
Well, last week he said he still loves to not necessarily give people meal plans because it's like, hey, I want you to be totally flexible, which that's where we started. I mean, 20 years ago when I started writing about flexible dieting, they even call it that back then, it was just macronutrient-based dieting. It was to give people that ultimate freedom and flexibility. And that's still an incredibly important principle to have. But I also now believe that whether you're a novice or very established as a dieter, it still helps, and we naturally gravitate toward having some structure anyway. So I think as coaches, it can be important to start off with our clients with a little bit more focus on structure and then teach them how to build more flexibility. So number one, the more structure we have, that leads to better accuracy and objectivity, leads to less stress. There are certainly a lot of people who focus on or take advantage of meal kit companies, and so you can get those same foods. Back in the day when I was in my early 20s, in college, prepping for shows, I would spend half a day every weekend doing my own meal prep. I mean, I'm baking chicken breast, I'm putting all this stuff in the fridge, and it was easy to just eat the same things all week long. Not because I had to, but because it was easier. So it's really cool now to see my oldest daughter, who is that same age. She comes over to our house, because we have a bigger kitchen, every Sunday, and what does she do? She bulk preps her food. She's not a bodybuilder. She's not doing anything in athletic performance. But it's like, it's just easier. Yeah. I can eat better, pay attention to my health if I do that. So I'm going to let you rebut me in terms of that philosophy. But how do you get involved? How deeply do you get involved with meal planning with your clients?
Well, so I'm not going to rebut you completely, but among my client base, which has gotten quite specific, which is the competitor. Now, if it was a general population client, if it was my mom, I would help her with a meal plan. I'm also not a registered dietitian, so it's not legal for me to say, here, eat this. But if it was someone that I wanted to get on this path, I completely agree. But for the competitor who needs to learn how to create their own eating patterns to be successful during contest prep, I've given people that first meal plan. And then when it's time for me to adjust their macronutrients, they now want me to adjust their meal plan, right? So at this point, I'm no longer teaching them to fish. I'm just giving them the fish, right? So that's where that comes from with me, is the actual experience of trying that approach. I still love the idea of what you told me to do. When you started working with me last year, you said, let's just start eating the same breakfast every day, right? So that idea of eating the same thing every day. You also told me when you have a client that's struggling to drop weight and they're hitting their macros, you said, okay, well, let's forget about the macros perspective. I want you to eat the same exact meals for 3 days in a row. I started doing this with clients. Huge success because they eliminated that variety. And when you get too much variety, there can be a lot of variation in, I went to Chipotle for lunch today. Tomorrow I went to Wendy's. The third day I ate at home. So even though you may have thought you were getting the same macros, there could be a huge variation in caloric intake because, you're not preparing your own food. Ultimately, the only way to be as accurate as possible is to prepare your own food, weigh it, put it away, and when it's time to eat it. So I find that when I give somebody a macronutrient plan and I have them create their own meal plan, that's the only way they can accomplish that.
And we're talking about the same thing from two different angles.
Yeah.
So we know high structure can be important. There are places to implement that, and high flexibility is not just an advancement, but you don't just work your way to that. That can be incredibly important even for a beginner.
Right.
But it just does come down to what is the best thing for that particular client and how it works for them. So we'll let you take the time to what you do.
Well, to kind of add to that, sometimes too much flexibility can cause chaos, where they're just floundering, where they think, I gotta save these carbs for this candy and sugar, and it sparks a craving and binge potentially. So like the structuring myself. I just look at the trends and what they do. If they're eating, if they're complaining of hunger, at 6 p.m. Okay, what are we doing earlier in the day? And things I find out like, oh, they're crushing all their food by 2. All their carbs are gone for the day. Well, we need to change that because you're doing something that's not suitable for you to sustain this. You're going to fail very quickly. And I really dig into what they're currently doing. If they're bloated, or I really dig deep if they're bloated, or if they're just tired, or if they're just miserable, I really look at structuring deeper. Even if they're not losing weight and not making as much progress, and I don't want to really go lower yet on food, I'll look at their structure. Sometimes they're eating like every 2 hours, even though we talked about this before. And meal timing is really good. Or meal timing that doesn't matter, but I feel like it does. In my opinion, just because of hunger reasons, but people try to stay ahead of hunger too much. So then they eat constantly around the clock. And they're always thinking about food.
Yeah, so let's transition into that. Let's actually go into what a good meal plan looks like. Not necessarily planning out what they're going to eat, but the time of the day and how to space and all that. But one of the things that I would say to you guys as future NAMS certified coaches is it's really important for you to get away from feeling like it's an if or thing. I still have prospective clients who will email me and say, hey, are you a macro coach or are you a meal plan coach? I didn't know people were dividing us into camps like that now, and so you really have to just use both. And so I would say for you guys to not make this a value judgment decision, but just say, look, I'm a coach. I use scientific evidence-based principles, and that means that we're going to do both. Whatever works for you.
Sometimes even after a certain period of time in the dieting process, I'll say, keep the timers out.
Lock it out.
Keep it like that. Eliminate hanging out and just take out all the variables. We don't want anything eventually in the way.
So transitioning over to meal planning, because my schedule often through my career being very busy, whether I'm traveling or in the office, seeing clients sometimes hour by hour on a schedule, I was never able to just say, okay, 9 a.m. I eat this, and I eat this. I didn't have those set times. So a lot of my competitive bodybuilding career, I had a sticky note in my pocket, and I knew exactly how much protein, carbs, and fat I was going to eat that day, and I just wrote that. I may not have any plan whatsoever. I don't know if I'm going to eat 8 whites and toast for breakfast or a protein shake or some oatmeal. I would just simply put those numbers in those columns. And so I had a running total. Like it'd be 4 in the afternoon, and I'm like, okay, I have this much protein, carbs, and fat left. Probably got about 2 meals left. What am I going to eat the rest of the day? So I'm making those decisions on the fly, which, like we said, can be freeing and give me that flexibility. Can also, as you said, Tyler, be pretty damn chaotic. Like, is this really going to give me the best results for the energy I need to train? Maybe I need to put some forethought into this would be a great pre-workout. This would be my great post-workout and move from there. So do you guys give your clients a certain level of education or kind of a script for how to lay out their meals?
Yeah, and it's all based around their schedule and their performance in the gym, because I want to make sure that they're actually training with high quality, and I want to make sure that they're hitting meals at times when they're going to be hungry. It's like Tyler mentioned earlier. Someone tells me they're starving at night, but they're not that hungry in the morning, but they're just force feeding themselves. We'll reduce the size of that first meal, maybe make it just a protein type meal, just get in some protein, and then save all those carbs and fats that we can for later in the day when they find themselves a little bit more ravenous. Because, as Corey often says, it can be tough to kind of restrict eating later in the day. That's usually when we're going to have problems. And if you have this approach of kind of going meal to meal, the last meal of the day can be very stressful because it can be some random set of macros. Anybody that's a flexible dieter for a long period of time has probably gone through that. And, it can be fun to go in the pantry and try to figure out something out or go to a restaurant, but it can also, prep can make things worse. It makes stress worse. It makes anxiety worse. So I definitely find for my clients, the most successful ones are taking out that decision-making process. They